Well, we have a special guest today. You know, it's Shirley MacLaine, right? I've known Shirley MacLaine for about 12 years, although by the end of the interview it could be 12,000 years. We'll find out. Think about Shirley MacLaine for a second. Shirley MacLaine has truly been a leader of her generation, which is a very special place to be. Starting basically as a chorus girl or dancer, she went on to be a Broadway star, then out to Hollywood. She was an ingenue and on to be a leading lady, a distinguished Academy Award-winning actress, back to Broadway for a Tony-winning triumph on Broadway. She's become a best-selling author, and we're going to talk about her recent book today. It's all in the playing. And interesting, at this stage in her life, she is one of the leaders of the New Age movement. So here she is, Shirley MacLaine. Whoa! That's nice. First standing ovation in the history of the program. Do we have to do anything now? If they could see me now. Let's have a seat and do some talking.
Which one should I
sit on the right, Shirley.
Okay. It's the first time in my life I've ever been on anyone's right.
Well, you know, in this lifetime.
Yeah, right.
Shirley has a new book, which I mentioned. Let's show it here, because I want to begin by talking about this. It's called It's All in the Playing. This is what, your fifth book?
Yes, I wrote out on a limb when I first began to write about metaphysics 5 times, and each of those manuscripts was entirely different, so I like to think this is my 11th.
Oh, I see. I'd like to go through some of the things that I read in the book that were interesting to me, and then as the show progresses, we'll take some questions from the audience and just have some fun. One of the things that hit me right away, you say in the book, you're creating your life to learn about yourself. Just elaborate on that a little bit.
You'd like me to write a mini book right here on your show? Well, I guess the best way to go at that is to, you know when something happens to you that you think is really traumatic and negative, and you start to blame others and flail out. What I'm beginning to realize is that I participated somehow in that negativity in order to learn more about myself, because I have to tell you, in having a lifetime of failure and success, I've learned much more about myself from failure than success. So I've learned to look at these so-called negative things that happen in my life as lesson learning processes, and then give up the idea of needing to learn through negativity anymore. There's a way to know who you are by not drawing that stuff to you.
Now, to me, that's always an interesting concept, because most people will think that somehow things descend on them from the heavens. But there is, in fact, and I believe in many of the things we're talking about in terms of the personal vibrations that you send out, you do draw negative things. I'll give you my interpretation of this. Years ago, when I was in North Carolina doing a show before I met you, I had a lot of psychics and mediums and things on the show, and I really got into studying Edgar Casey.
Yeah.
And one night, my show was canceled because the guest didn't show up, so I went to pick up my girlfriend, who was in an Edgar Casey study group, and I sat in on it. And that night, I learned something that stayed with me the rest of my life. Give us this day our daily bread, interpreting it. Give us this day that which we need in order to grow.
Yeah.
That's really what you're talking about there.
So it's really like looking at something that's very tragic is a perception you choose to take. It's the half a glass of water thing.
Is it half empty or half full?
Yeah.
But there are times in life when things, like for example, another thing that comes out of the book is you say there are no accidents. I think there are times in life when it's virtually impossible to be positive about the things that are happening to you. The tragic loss of a little child because of a drunk driver. Right. Virtually impossible to say.
No, it's not impossible. It's your perception.
Very difficult.
Oh,
very difficult.
Extremely difficult. That drunk and that child, and on some other cosmic level, this harmony is working. That is what we now assess to be cosmic karmic justice. Otherwise, Bill, nothing makes sense. I think what got me into all this was the traveling that I did as a political activist and kind of a human reporter. And when I went to India, I couldn't, why was all this happening? But as Mother Teresa said when she came to New York, this is true poverty. because the people in New York down on the Bowery who are sleeping over the subway gratings don't understand the spiritual participation of the learning process that they're engaged in.
And you think the people in India have more of a sense of that?
No question about it.
Because they're actually more spiritually
They're more
rooted.
spiritual. They that's karma comes from India. I mean, this is the oldest civilization in the world. It's very sophisticatedly adept at explaining the role of man's purpose in time.
I know we're going to be talking about many of these things with the audience. I want to make sure I get through some of my specific things, just things from the book, which I enjoyed very much. Some of the stories about the people in the book are fascinating. Albert Finney, for example.
Yeah.
Albert Finney takes you to the greatest lunch that anyone could, because you wanted him to play one of the characters. The book basically is dealing with the experience of making the film out on a limb. Just tell us a little bit about Albert Finney, and what was he doing to you that day? Why did he put you through all this stuff?
No, it isn't that. It's that Albert Finney is an extremely theatrical human being. And I don't think he wanted to play that part. I don't think he wanted to play any part at that point in his life. And he was reluctant to say something simple like, I don't want to play this. So he invited me to dinner at his favorite restaurant. And I came out of my cab, and I saw him behind me get out of his cab. And he was wearing this long black cloak. He looked like the lodger. Remember that picture?
Sure.
Little bit of Dracula thrown in. But this gorgeous body, and very, very hefty and commanding and so theatrical. It was though that small street in London had become his stage. Right. So he swept me up in his arms, and he took me down and showed me all the new fashions and talked about how the new fashions were representative of what the new political shifts in point of view were. I thought that was all very interesting.
I'm sure I understand it, but it sounds...
Oh, well, somewhere it relates. Then we walked into the restaurant, and he introduced me to the first woman as his girlfriend. I thought, oh, my God, he's got a woman who's the maitre d' here. It's interesting. And then as we went down the steps to this Italian restaurant, there were several other women coming up, and he introduced me to all of them as his girlfriend. I thought, oh, this is even more interesting. As we proceeded down to dinner, there was a Paraguayan trio playing, and he told me, he said, I have, my darling, I have brought this Paraguayan trio all the way from Paraguay for your enjoyment, my dear. I thought that was very interesting. Then he turns around and he said to everybody in the restaurant, and these are extras who have come.
We did the same thing here, as a matter of fact, today. And the upshot is, he didn't do it. Now, there's something, one specific thing in the book that I was dying for elaboration on, but one of the reasons I like my job is that I can ask follow-up questions. In the book, you're talking about John Hurd, wonderful actor, and how he got to, like, the term he uses, push my buttons. Then you have one sentence where you refer to Robert Mitchum knew how to push my buttons, and Deborah Winger knew how to push my buttons. Start with Mitchum. What do you mean by that? I didn't know exactly what you were saying. What did Mitchum do to you, Shirley, that pushed your buttons?
Part of that I'll answer. The other part we'll just wait for some interview in another incarnation. How's
All right,
that?
fine.
I'm very attracted to people who have the capacity to make the English language extremely obtuse. I mean, you know those people that rattle on and on with very colorful words, extremely intriguing, complicated thought patterns.
Like Barry Farber in New York does that.
No, Barry is a day at the beach of clarity compared to these people. And they force you to sit forward. They're going to get to the point. I know they are. There's going to be a reason for them saying this. I mean, I've got a hernia from waiting for what... but it's something to do. Now, the whole exercise is an exercise in keeping people away. You see, instead of really being clear about what you think. I didn't like what I did last night, and this is why. There's a whole thing about what went on with the weather and the moon and what they ate, and how this sensuality of what they ate sort of in their toe and their front, and all this is going on. I am just, of course, mesmerized. So at the end of it, I'm thinking, you know, a half an hour's gone by, and I never got the answer to my question, and I never will get the answer to my question, because they're still going to go on with, you know, all these things. Now, that's what I mean, and that's what John does.
John Hurt does that.
Hurd, not Hurt.
H-E-A-R-D, John Hurt. It's not Bill Hurt, it's not John Hurt.
No, he's quick to remind you.
John Hurd.
Right.
But what about Mitchum? Mitchum doesn't sound like that kind of person at all.
Mitchum is one of the most intelligent, spellbinding story weavers,
Boy,
especially even when he's drunk. Maybe more when he's drunk
so
than you've ever met in your life.
What would he push? What kind of buttons?
Now, I don't want to get into that. It's the part I'm not going to tell you.
That's why you didn't follow it up in the book. How about Deborah Winger?
I
Same
definitely
question.
wouldn't do it with her.
You know?
Forget about it.
Well,
go on to another question.
I will go on to another question. You made a movie with John Forsythe, The Trouble with Harry, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and you make references. It's okay to applaud if you like. It's good. Now, again, along the same line, you made some references that Hitchcock wasn't so easy to work with, wasn't good to you, but this is not news. Hitchcock was not particularly great to work with actors, thought of actors as cattle. But later in the book, you're talking about Hitchcock coming through when
that was so
just tell that
fabulous.
story. It's very interesting.
Yeah, Hitch started me on my career. He found me in Pajama Game. And he is, of course, a master, or was a master of mystery, a master of tension. So as Colin and I were writing the screenplay for Out on a Limb, we knew that there was some tension missing. And we didn't really understand how to fix it. And at one point, when Kevin was channeling some of these entities, the energy of Hitchcock hovered around and talked to them so that they would point out to Colin and me that we needed to instill more tension in this scene, in that scene. If you make the tension in this scene, leave it unresolved so that the audience will stay tuned through the commercials to have it resolved an hour later. And as that was happening, I noticed, I'm wired up here so I can walk, right?
Sure,
I
do whatever you
noticed that I got up from the chair. Now, Hitch used to walk like this. He wouldn't walk like this. And he was a little, you know, we all know what Hitchcock looked like. And he sort of, and I started to walk like this. I thought, oh, this is going too far. I started to and I wondered why I was doing this. This was before I realized that it was Hitch hovering around. And so when I went back and asked Kevin, who was still in the trance, why I was walking like this, why I was suddenly thinking about Hitchcock, the entities came through and told me that he had been kind of upset. He wouldn't let my husband on the set, and he was sort of cruel in his directorial techniques. And he was now paying off some of the karma that he incurred with me by helping me with the needed tension in this particular script. And would I take some of these little techniques of mystery and how to make this spiritual metaphysical mystery work, because now that he was on the other side, he understood what I was talking
When you were
about.
going through. He's probably going to come back as a spirit carrier in another life. This is what I like. We need to, I wish we didn't have to. We need to take a commercial break. When I come back, this is what I want to get into. 47%, a recent large survey said 47% of all people in the United States feel that they have been in touch with someone who has died. And the process frequently used here is channeling. Let's get into that when we come back, okay? We'll be back right after this. Well, let me show this. Shirley MacLaine is our guest. I had a lovely weekend and part of last evening reading her book, which I enjoyed very much. It's called It's All in the Playing, and it's a Bantam hardcover. And I was on the West Coast a couple weeks ago, and there was a cover story which you probably saw, maybe you didn't, the Los Angeles Times Magazine. That's where I got that statistic from the LA Times. 47% of all Americans feel they've had some contact with someone who has died. Let's take a look. Raise your hands in the audience if you feel that you've had some contact with someone who has passed on to the great beyond. All right. Now, I'd like to get to some of you and hear some of those stories, and if you're listening at home with your hand up, put it down.
We can see you anyway.
Shirley can see you, and I'm trying to get close behind. When was your first situation where you felt that you were having some contact with?
You mean other than channeling?
Yeah, other than channeling.
You'd have to say that the whole channeling experience means contact with the great beyond too.
Well, take a moment and explain what channeling is. We're using terms here that maybe not everybody knows.
How can I say this? A trance medium is a person who sets his or her own consciousness aside sort of like you do when you go to sleep. You set your consciousness aside and allow yourself the freedom of everything. Let's put it that way. All of this is going to sound very Zen Buddhist, but maybe it's time to start.
We won't bleep it. It's okay.
No. I mean, it's, you know, it's looking at some things that are much more conversant with the psychology of people in Asia than here. Okay, the medium puts aside his or her consciousness, and spiritual guides and entities don't possess the body. They overshadow the body and use the face of the medium, the larynx, the voice box, the hands. The relationship between each medium and each entity is different, Bill, because there are some mediums that the entities don't want to use their eyes, and so their eyes are remaining closed the whole time. Others use the eyes. Some just sit, and the body's never used at all. Only the voice box is used. Some actually get up, walk around, move, can do exercises. The eyes are open, and it seems as though you're talking to that person who might possibly be acting. That's always the question. Is this person acting?
And in fact, there must be many mediums, or a percentage of them, who are just making money doing this, who are phony. I mean, you have to realize there has to be some of these people.
Sure, like there is in any profession.
Exactly.
But you know, even that I find is a lesson learning experience. If I'm drawn to believing a charlatan, I certainly learn from that. I learn a huge lesson in discernment. So even in that, I have to say there's a purposeful good in it. And the whole point of this spiritual investigation is to find the reasons for justice, the reasons, I mean, is there such a thing as good and bad, etc. It becomes a very profound study.
Right.
But to pare down this question of trans-channeling, it is the same question, really, as do we die when we die? I mean, is it over and out? Is it finished? Is that the end? Trans-channeling, to me, is a kind of proof, if you will. Who can prove what's really going on there? But the British Society for Cyclical Research has come fairly close to proving that the human soul is eternal. The human soul exists on some level everywhere all the time.
Which is what organized religion has basically been telling us for hundreds and hundreds of years, that the soul goes beyond. It's a matter of what happens to the soul.
That is the issue.
That's why wars have been fought. What's going on with the soul? Anyway.
But it's so stupid to conduct a war because you're not really killing anybody.
Well, I agree, but
you're just incurring karma. Nobody's dying.
Actually, that raises a question of philosophy. If you say that wars are stupid because nobody's really dying, what do you say the reason for, 30, 50, 60,000 deaths in a war are?
It didn't have to happen, is what it's saying. And it's saying that we are really remiss in our spiritual understanding. It's really saying that we haven't got it straight, that the harmony of the eternalness of the soul is the giant truth. And that when you take the physical vehicle of someone away, you are incurring tremendous karma for yourself. You're not killing them, you're only hurting yourself.
But it would be dangerous, I think, to have a leader who devalued the living of life to an extent that he wouldn't worry, or she wouldn't worry about sending people into battle because they weren't really dying. That would be bad. Because I think we need to honor life. We don't have to...
Well, honor it totally and never go to battle.
Right.
Is the point.
But anyway, we're slightly off the track. In terms of contact with the story, the first time that it hit you, I think...
Oh, okay. In relation to the 47% who feel that they've
had some contact with someone who's died.
When my friend Christopher Adler passed away, this was the man who wrote the lyrics for some of my shows. It was a dear friend and very young. He was 28. I knew that he was sick and I knew he was going, but I didn't know when. One night I was lying in bed and it was the middle of the night and a light filled my room until I woke up. You know how light in the morning wakes you up because it filters through your eyelids? I thought, my goodness, it must be morning. And I woke up and it was like 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning. There was no sun shining, but the room was full of light. And when I checked with Christopher's father, he had died at exactly that time. And I felt it was Christopher, and I kind of felt him. You see, all of this, it's not necessarily what happens in your brain, it's what happens in your feelings, what happens in your heart. And we're beginning to come to a time and place in our culture where we're respecting the feelings of the heart as much as we do the scientific reductionist thinking of the brain. So when I sat there in my bed saying, why is this light in this room? Something in my heart said, this is Christopher. I didn't hear anything, really, except if you can hear something in your heart, which I did.
But that's what woke you up, the feeling.
That's what woke me up, and there was definite physical light in the room.
Now, the folks in the audience who raise their hands, let me see those hands. I think it'd be interesting at this moment just to hear a couple of similar stories from people. Can I see the hands, please? All right. Gentleman here in the red, right in the front row. Yeah. Just what's your experience been, sir?
Well, a friend of mine, woman recently, and we started to date, and we weren't sure why we would connect it this way. And one evening we were together, I had fallen asleep, and she was still talking. And,
that's not basically a good sign.
No, no.
She was talking about him.
She was talking like, why are you asleep? Anyway, go ahead. What happened?
And it was one of those, a catnap, we'll put it that way. And she was talking about a friend of hers. And here, she started to cry, woke me up, and she said, why did you say that? And I said, what, I didn't say anything. She said, yes, you did. You told me about Keith. And I said, well, what do you mean about Keith? Because I had really not been talking with her. And she said, you told me about you dying. And here, this fellow that I had known remotely, that she had been dating in high school, had committed suicide.
At that time?
Had died 2 years prior to this. And when we started investigating it, his presence was there. He had come through me to talk to her about why he had never said he was sorry for committing suicide.
Ooh.
And his hanging around and his being there through my voice to her was a release for both of them.
You know something, Bill, about this? You should ask yourself the question, it seems to me, what your karmic relationship was with Keith, because you had to give permission for him to use your physical instrument to talk to your girlfriend. And there's obviously some connection with all of the three of you, obviously. And this is the adventure of it. This is what makes it such a fabulously colorful investigation, that it's not only you and the woman who have a connection, but you and Keith.
Well, what we had found, the story that had gone on with this was that he stayed around for a couple of days until I contacted a person I know who does spiritual work. And we all went to her place and had this release of Keith. He came into the room and there was his presence, and it's like a soul memory. And what I got from it was that my purpose in the relationship was to help Keith leave.
Oh, how fabulous.
Once she released her anger with him for committing suicide, he was able to move on.
Why don't we do this? We'll take a break. We'll come back, and we'll take a few more such incidents from the audience with Shirley MacLaine right after this. Someone over here. Yeah. Stand up, please.
This doesn't have that much to do with it, but I was visiting my mother in New York. And my mother-in-law, before I left, had said to me, you really shouldn't go up there now. And it was like, I thought maybe the weather, I had a baby with me. So when I went to New York, one night my mother and I were sitting there watching television. And as clear as can be, I heard my mother-in-law calling my name. Because we lived in the 3rd floor, and she used to come to the 2nd floor and call up to me. And I looked at my mother and I said, did you call me? And she said, no. I said, no, it was my mother-in-law. So we got stuck in New York for 3 days because of a bad snowstorm and couldn't get home. And I called back to Philadelphia to tell them we would have to come home by bus because the planes were grounded. And when I got off the bus, my husband was there with all his brothers and sisters, but I thought, this is nothing. They always meet at the bus. We didn't have a car. We got in the car and they told me my mother-in-law had died. And I said, oh my God, when? And when they told me, it was the same time that I had heard that.
Let's look at these stories, because there are millions of these stories, not only in this country but everywhere. I have sort of tried to figure out, with all my reading and all my investigation, what is this saying? Because that's what everybody wants to know. What does this mean? When you are in touch with your higher self, as I would call it, the oversoul, the true eternal you, it resides in a space that recognizes all time at once. As Einstein said, there's no such thing as linear time. Linear time is an invention of man. All time is happening simultaneously. When the oversoul, the superconsciousness, as Freud used to say, the superconsciousness can look at the past and can look at the future. And if you are in tune with your superconsciousness, you get messages from it. So your superconsciousness was hearing the mother-in-law's voice. The superconsciousness was hearing and feeling the presence of the cousin's mother. Why this work is so important: when you can get attuned and aligned with your own superconsciousness, you are attuned and aligned with the great universal one, as the mystics say.
What do you personally do to attune yourself?
That's exactly the issue. You learn how to meditate and allow yourself to just be. Allow your own consciousness, that is this sort of nattering voice that tells you all the time what you're doing wrong, what you should be doing, etc. Go into a meditation and put that voice somewhere else and allow yourself to touch this higher self, and you are touching all time at once.
How can somebody who's never studied meditation whatsoever, just heard you or somebody else talk about it, do this without taking a formal class in it? What's a basic way to do it? Would you say sitting on the beach, looking at the ocean, watching waves, breathing helps you get to that?
You know, we are meditating when we don't even realize it. You know, when you're daydreaming, you're meditating. Depression is a biological meditation. When you are depressed and you don't want to do anything, your higher self is saying to you, don't do anything. Allow yourself to just be. Sink into that. Let yourself experience it. A kind of a laughter is meditation.
Why? You know, here's something I wonder about. Why is there a fear surrounding this? Every time on my New York show that we would deal with meditation, there would invariably, someone would come out of the woodwork or be protesting or come to the station kind of saying that this is mind control, that something bad is going to happen as a result of it. I think if a politician says, like a Jerry Brown type figure, he gets painted as a kooky guy because he's interested in Zen, when in fact a larger percentage of people in the world than the United States really treat this as a very serious thing. But why is there always this fear surrounding the simple thing of meditation, which is basically on one level just really relaxing and putting your mind in a very tranquil place?
Well, people are afraid if they let go, something will happen to them. I think basically and profoundly they don't trust that God is good. When you really come down to it, your vision of God in direct ratio to the vision you have that God is what it is your sense of fear.
Do you work with your dreams at all?
I do.
I want you to tell the story. I have one person watching, a person I've cared about for a long time, watching, who needs to stop smoking. And there are a lot of other people I don't know who need to stop smoking. I want you to tell your dream story about how it led you to stop smoking.
Yeah. We were shooting this scene in Machu Picchu, and it was all very dramatic, how we changed the weather. That's the real story.
That's a good one. That's also on my list to ask you too, but do the smoking.
It takes too long.
Yeah.
Read the book. So I came back to this little room that they had for me, and I lay down. And it wasn't a dream, it was like a vision. And I used to smoke Vantage cigarettes. I never inhaled, really, but I had this habit. It was a silent companion that never talked back, you know. When I was writing, I'd light up a cigarette, and I thought, this is comfortable. Well, the dream was that there was this huge package of Vantage cigarettes, the size of a house. Thought, that's interesting. And beside it was a ladder. And something said in my dream, climb up the ladder. So I climbed up the ladder, and I peered into this great big house-size package of Vantages, and it was empty. And this voice said, see to it that it stays that way.
And that did it. We'll be back right after this. More with Shirley MacLaine. Thank you. We have a phone call, and it's not Alfred Hitchcock. It's Fran Springfield. Fran, you're on the line. Hello.
Yes, good morning, Bill. Good morning, Shirley.
Good morning.
This is Fran from Springfield, Delaware County.
Oh, your name is
My question concerns children. I was at your seminar in New York in May, and it was a wonderful experience. I've gotten a great deal out of it, of all the reading list. I've done a lot of the reading. But I hung up with, I have 2 children, and I also work with children. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on raising children. I find organized religion too confining. So a spiritual training that is intuitive, I guess you would say.
How old are the children?
Well, my children are 7 and 11.
And you're just calling for basic advice on raising children in a spiritual sense?
No, that's all right. I
Go ahead,
understand.
Shirley.
I sort of look at children these days now as teachers, because any child in a family is going to teach every adult member of that family more about themselves. That's sometimes hard to remember because you think you have the responsibility for teaching them. But children are old souls. Children have been around many, many times.
Right.
And they choose to come in to learn from you. You choose to have them in to learn from them. So to kind of, what I do with the children in my life now is just relax in a more environmental democracy, so to speak, and say, okay, we're students and teachers equally for each other, and don't take it quite so seriously, thinking that the responsibility is all that intense. Relax the intensity, and if a child has a fantasy, I like to talk about the fantasy with them. I like to, if they have an imaginary friend, I like to sit down and talk with the imaginary friend. Instead of saying they're crazy and turning off the potential for expanded thinking, let them turn it off when it comes time. I mean, after a while, the imaginary friend is not going to be necessary to talk to because you're going to get so addicted to the physical dimension as the child grows.
It's more like my 11-year-old is, maybe he's my guide, but he's kind of telling me, I'm crazy. He sees all my books, and he jokingly says, well, what is that stuff? And
well,
so
he's asking you to teach him. If he says that this is crazy, he's really saying, well, tell me so I won't. He doesn't like to think his mother's crazy.
Right.
So he wants to know what his mother's thinking. So
right.
This is a sort of a roundabout way of saying, teach me what it is you think is real because my friends think it's crazy. In other words, he's asking you to hone and articulate your point of view. That's a teacher.
Fran, I thank you for the call.
Thank you.
Yeah, Shirley, one of the people who works at the station I want to identify said, please ask Shirley MacLaine why her seminars are so expensive. I can't afford them. And so why the high price tag on them?
Well, oh God, I thought so long and hard before I did this. I could only take grand ballrooms, and I didn't want people to come for a spiritual tea party with a movie star and not be committed. I know how expensive they are.
Was it about $300?
It was $300 for the weekend.
Yeah.
But a real estate seminar goes for $750, an acting seminar goes for $1,500, and a stockbroker seminar is off the wall because it's about money. And I thought, what am I going to do here? My preference would really be to do it for nothing, because none of this is for me. I'm using the money for my spiritual center. But I had to come up with some figure. And I decided, since the seminar was basically revolving around the connection of mind, body, and spirit, I decided to charge $100 for mind and $100 for body and $100 for spirit. That's how I came to it. You know, this whole subject of money is excruciatingly important in this New Age movement.
Yeah.
And that's what the press always focuses on. But when you do something for nothing, you truly are placing the other person in a position of obligation. So we have to figure out what we think we're worth.
Well, I guess there's always a natural suspicion when we're dealing with something that we really can't see, an ability to be a medium or actually a teaching ability, and we're charging money for it. I think there's always a suspicion when money enters the picture. It is as if we're expecting people to be like Jesus and walk, barefoot, wearing a robe. And
yeah, but Jesus had a system of barter going too. They fed him. They gave him wine. The system of barter at that time was food and lodging. The system of barter at this time is money.
I have a question here from Harvard theologian Harvey Cox, a major thinker about what's going on in philosophy and religion, called New Age thought, quote, a kind of yuppie religious experience. You can have everything without discomfort or pain. If he were here now, how would you relate to that statement, Shirley?
I would agree with that. I think he's right. I think it's a little sarcastic, and not everyone in the New Age systems of investigation are yuppies. There are a lot of people who are poor, who are not upperly mobile people. But yes, I think this New Age approach to making your life better is saying that you can create a more positive reality and not have to learn through suffering, not have to learn through pain. But you see, he is a theologian, and he does believe in suffering. He does believe in pain. They always call him up about New Age stuff. He's the one they always ask.
What about people like the amazing Randy and the other non-entertainment types who really go around claiming that they're being objective in debunking paranormal claims and can always find some reason why it's not really a paranormal experience? I mean, these are your critics we're talking about.
Oh, sure. Randy is another one they always trot out. And the thing that I most object about this Randy the magician person is that he will spend, on a talk show like this, the whole time debunking some extraordinarily proved phenomenon of the spirit, and then tell you to get his book at $16.95 to prove that it's not real. He's really there to sell his books.
I also read someplace, not in your book, but your brother, Warren Beatty, leaves the room when you start talking about this.
Oh, no, that's not
that was in the LA Times article, I believe. That it
was
said,
it really?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, I'm certain.
No.
It said something to the effect that when you start going into this reincarnation stuff, Warren Beatty gets up and leaves the room. I mean, that's where I read it.
I mean, he's been known to leave the room anytime he's bored. I think he's bored by it, but he has told me that so many of the women friends he has, his co-workers, how strongly they are investigating their own spiritual search. Warren's very smart. He knows better than to just cast this out of hand. No, he doesn't do that.
Also, you write in your new book, I think, very lovingly, with in an interesting way, about your mother and father together for 55 years.
Yeah.
What an amazing thing. And here, I mean, they've produced two leaders of their generations in the American arts community, you and your brother Warren. Just everything aside about the New Age movement, what did they do as parents that helped to create you two superstars?
Yeah, amazing. I'm going to have to write a book addressing myself to that question. I don't think I can be very deeply articulate in a couple of seconds, but I guess it had to do with Mother's extremely talented as an actress. She's Canadian, you know, and worked in Canada as an actress and also here. Dad also harbored desires to be a performer.
I think,
yeah, he was a musician, but he once told me that he longed to run off and join a circus. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
And this is a man who had a doctorate in philosophy and psychology. So maybe Warren and I are living out those desires that Mom and Dad gave up in order to devote their lives to us. I think that's more or less.
It's interesting. Well, as many parents have done for their children, for sure. Well, why don't we take a break and we'll continue with Shirley MacLaine right after this. All right, right to it. We have someone waiting on the line with a question. But first, hi, ma'am. What's your name?
Peg Richardson.
Peg?
Wilmington, Delaware.
Thank you for coming to the show today. What's your question for Shirley MacLaine?
My children, I understand, are always more psychic than grown-ups, and a lot of times when they're playing, they actually, these characters that they're playing with are actually people to them because they're spirits.
I think it's because they're closer to the astral dimension when they're young. You know, when you look at a baby's face, it looks so wise and so all-knowing, and the older they get, the dumber they look. Well, I'm talking sarcastically there, but that a baby is so close to that other side because it's just come in from that other side. So it has an acquaintance with it that slowly disappears because the babies come into the physical dimension to learn in this schoolroom.
Cindy from Bridesburg. Finally, after a long wait, you're on the line. Hello.
Hi, Bill.
Hi.
Shirley.
Hi.
What's up? Well, a lot of what it is that I basically want to talk about is the living and the living, the connection between people that you don't know and people that you love. I was raised kind of in a third-generation spiritual sense, and a great deal of what you're learning and teaching us now.
And it's not so much a question as it is a comment, in that for years I turned away from my belief and what I would call kind of the superior instinct, the way of connecting with people and binding through love and a great deal of knowledge. And now I find other people that I'm connecting with almost as if we're kind of a 4% of the population, almost as if there's a smaller percentage of us that is bringing the rest of us forward through the new age. And that it seems that our hypersensitivities to a great deal of what you might call the magic in life has a great deal to do with the binding of ourselves with God through each other. And it's very beautiful. And I've turned away from it for years, but in the very recent past especially, the connections and the coincidences have been too strong to be just that, coincidences. And it's beautiful. And I wish you would talk more about the interconnection and the idea of the harmony and the binding between people who not only love each other, but sometimes don't even know each other and are drawn to each other for that love, not necessarily people who are dead.
I know, I can tell you I have a lot to say, and I hate to cut you off, but I think if I didn't, we'd be going for the rest of the show.
She's done it very well.
Very well. Okay.
Very well. That was
Thanks,
beautiful.
Cindy. Thank you very much. Now, question over here. I'll take this woman right here.
I was at your last seminar in New York, one of the 1200, and I was wondering if you've heard anything through the entities, if the harmonic convergence was effective in terms of numbers of people that meditated that day, or any of the effects of that day.
And just quickly remind us what the harmonic conversion was.
Well, I'll
a
try.
couple weeks ago.
It was the planetary alignment, unlike we've seen in centuries, that helps align energies that we could access to help our own growth. You know how the full moon sort of amplifies feelings that you can use either positively or negatively. I'm finding the results of harmonic convergence coming up in more linear ways. I haven't asked any of the entities. I don't have to, because I can see it. I deal, of course, with a lot of doctors because so many of my friends are sick now. And they are saying that they're seeing an acceleration in disease and an acceleration in spontaneous remissions. So you're seeing a polarity of people who will allow themselves to work with the light, work with these invisible, unseen spiritual energies, and heal the body, and people who will ignore it for a little bit longer, and in ignoring it will experience an acceleration in dis-ease. And the hospitals are reporting that. That with my doctor friends, that's what they're telling me. I will ask the entities and see whether 144,000 made it or not.
All right, let's, one quick question. We have J.Z. Knight coming on the program talking about channeling. What's one question you would like to ask J.Z. Knight?
I would like to ask her why she feels it necessary to live with such material wealth.
All right, we'll do that. We'll take a break and we'll wrap things up with Shirley MacLaine right after this. All three of her books, one Out on the Limb, which is, I know, this is the one we're interested in, right? This is the main one. It's a new one. It's all on the plane. Yeah. One last question. In the current issue of either Ladies' Home Journal or McCall's, I get them mixed up. You're going to Russia soon at the invitation of Gorbachev, is that correct?
Yeah, I decided not to go. I decided to do a movie instead.
What's the movie?
Called Madame Shuzatska, and I do play a Russian American. I have Russia somewhere in my soul.
I know that. You're right about that.
Oh, boy.
Edgar Casey said that people with birthmarks, Gorbachev has one right on the top of his head, can either affect people in a positive way or a negative way. Lots of people. What's your feeling about Gorbachev?
Oh, I think he's an extremely progressive leader, Bill. I wish we had a leader like that from the point of view of our own system. But you know, there's a prediction, and I believe it's Nostradamus. The man who leads the country of the bear with the birthmark on his head will change the world.
Listen, it's about time that we headed in a more peaceful direction with our so-called enemies, with our enemies, the Russians. Shirley MacLaine, I want to thank you. Come down and say hello to some of the people. We'll see you tomorrow. No show. We have bicentennial coverage. Thanks for watching.